Well, welcome to our session.
Yes.
How's everyone enjoying reunion so far? Awesome. It is great to have everyone here. So it's really about redefining success, because when we all left here 25 years ago, I think it's safe to say we all had some vision of what we thought success was going to be. And turns out there's a whole study that's been following people for, I think, 87 years now. Mm-hmm. And it's over 700 families. And Dr. Robert Waldinger, who is a medical professional, is a psychiatrist, a Zen priest, and has been the head of the Harvard Study of Adult Development since 2003.
Yeah.
So this is the longest running study that has followed people's well-being. Is that right?
Yeah, as far as we know.
In the world.
It's ever been done.
So I have been fangirling about this study since 2008. I was grappling with what it meant to live a meaningful, happy life. I was given the opportunity to come back and be a teaching fellow for the Positive Psychology 1504 class. So I lived back in the dorms and I got to teach back in Sanders Theater. And that's when I first learned about this study with Tal Ben-Shahar, who, if anybody took psychology applied to business, did anyone do that? He was my teaching fellow. And he became the professor of the most popular undergraduate course at Harvard a few years ago.
I'm going to pause. Who are you?
Oh, I am Sara Blanchard. I'm your classmate. I am a social justice podcaster, author, a total nerd for positive psychology and what it means to live a good life. So I am psyched that so many people are interested in engaging in this conversation.
Yes. And I'm Kibi Anderson, everybody. And it's a pleasure to be here. Yes. Sara and I have reconnected on a lot of other planes, but most excited to be here celebrating 25 years and being able to foster a conversation around what success looks like, what happiness looks like. I am an executive coach and leadership strategist. I'm a learner, I'm a seeker, and I'm somebody who does not have it figured out. So I am here in conversation with somebody who is brilliant, with another brilliant person, and excited to learn and see and stuff. So I just wanted to give space for you to acknowledge who you are, lovely, because you're amazing.
Thank you. Taking up space. This is good. We learned that from this morning, right? We all belong, we all matter. Thank you for that, Kibi.
Do you want me to say a little more about the study? Would that be helpful?
Sure, that'd be great.
Say what it is.
Yes.
Okay. So this, first of all, it's wonderful to be here. I'm from the class of 1973, so
Woo!
way behind us. But I didn't used to come to my reunions, even though I live in town, and now I realize that it is so much fun, and I meet, besides seeing old friends, I meet people I didn't know when I was an undergrad, and I bet you guys are doing that too, so I'm just enjoy. Okay, so this study, the Harvard Study of Adult Development, started actually as two studies. Both started in the year 1938, and both started here on this campus. One, Harvard Student Health Service, the deans chose 268 sophomores who they thought were fine, upstanding specimens. Because what they wanted to do was a study of normal development from adolescence to early adulthood. So, if you want to study normal development, you study all white guys from Harvard, right? I mean, this is the most politically incorrect sample you could possibly have. We are constantly having to explain to the federal government why they should still fund us. And we have been funded.
Is it still hard, though? I don't know.
It's still hard.
With the current administration.
So the other sample, also all white guys, was started by Sheldon Gluck, who was a professor at Harvard Law School, and Eleanor Gluck, his spouse, who was a social worker. And they were interested in juvenile delinquency, but particularly how some kids born into really disadvantaged circumstances manage to stay on good developmental paths. So they chose 456 middle school age boys from not just Boston's poorest neighborhoods, but from the most troubled families. Known on average to 5 social service agencies in 1938. So severe domestic violence, parental mental illness, physical illness. And these were kids who were staying on good paths. And all of those kids were white as well, Because in 1938, the city of Boston was 97.4% white. The waves of migration of people of color didn't come to this city until after the Second World War, which is why we have to say to NIH every few years, look, if you want to start in 1938 in Boston, you get white people. And so what we do is we do our best to make sure that all the findings that we publish, we relate to other populations. And particularly, we don't want to publish things as scientific facts that are really idiosyncratic to these samples. So we do our best to do that. But it was a pretty cool group of people. And eventually we brought in wives, almost all the spouses. And then we studied the second generation, more than half of whom are women. So we have a lot of gender balance now, but everybody is still Caucasian. There were a couple of famous people in the Harvard group. John F. Kennedy was part of the Harvard group. Ben Bradley, the longtime editor of the Washington Post. We just found out a couple of years ago that the Boston Strangler was part of the Inner City group. But most of these people weren't famous, they weren't infamous, they were just living their lives, which is why we will never disclose. I can only tell you about those names because those were public disclosures. Otherwise, we protect everybody's privacy, so we don't talk about anybody specifically who was in the study.
Well, and before we kind of dive into the questions, I'd love to just ask you, like, the so what? Like, what are you guys finding for those people who may not be as familiar with the research results? What are you learning?
Well, we've studied the big domains of life: mental health, physical health, work life, like who got promoted, how much money you made, relationships, eventually aging and retirement. And first we did questionnaires, we did detailed medical exams, we got their records from their doctors, but then as new scientific methods came online to study well-being, we started putting 80-year-olds into MRI scanners and showing them different images. We started bringing people into our lab and deliberately stressing them out and then doing these elaborate measures of how quickly they recovered. We draw blood for DNA and messenger RNA, and I particularly like that because it was never imagined in 1938, just as MRIs were never imagined. So we've brought in new methods to study the same big topics.
And one of the biggest findings is that sort of the cornerstone of our long-term health and happiness is the quality of relationships we have.
Absolutely.
Is that right?
Absolutely. So we've published hundreds of papers and a bunch of books, but there are really two big domains of findings. One, you won't be surprised by. It's that if we take care of our health, it hugely matters for adding years, not just years to our lives, but years of being healthy to our lives. And so that means, regular exercise, not smoking, not abusing alcohol or drugs, reasonable diet, getting enough sleep. All of that stuff matters. But the other big finding that we didn't believe at first was that the people who stayed the healthiest and lived the longest were the people who were more connected to other people and who had warmer connections with other people. And we didn't believe it at first because the question was, how could this be a thing? Like, how could the quality of our relationships actually get into our bodies and shape our physiology? Many other studies have found the same thing, so now we know that this is a really robust finding. And we've been working for the last 10 years in our lab to try to understand, how does this work? So we know a lot more about it.
Can we expand on that relationships a little bit more? Yeah. Because it's one thing to have relationships, but certainly part of that is about being seen and feeling like you matter and that you're being acknowledged. But when you're talking about certain elite spaces, some maybe more exclusionary spaces, do you have any insight on how things like race or gender or identity play into that sense of belonging or that sense of community?
Yeah, so our findings have to do with being connected to individuals, right? And if you're an introvert, it might just be one or two individuals, and that's fine. Then there's the whole issue of stress and societal stress. So think about marginalized groups and how people experience micro and macro aggressions all day long. That sets up stress reactions in the body, and we know that those reactions break down the body. Mm-hmm. So we know that being in one of those marginalized groups, being the object of discrimination really does break down health. But the individual relationships that are warmer are the ones that promote health.
So, and I just want to make sure I'm hearing you. It sounds like irrespective of gender, race, the idea is, can you have a human one-on-one connection no matter what your respective backgrounds can be? Like that actually is a determinant in terms of whether or not you're going to be able to live long.
Yeah. And it doesn't have to be an intimate relationship. Like you don't have to be married or partnered, but you want to have some people who are your kind of go-to, have my back kind of people.
Yeah, it's so fascinating, So when I arrived, I'm going to talk about it for myself. I imagine many others. I had this idea of what success was going to be when I first got to Harvard. I'm going to get the big degree, get the big job, get the big, husband, the kids, all of the things, all of which I probably have failed at. And, now that we're 25 years out, I think all of us are kind of coming to this new point of how do I think about success in a different way? Like, how do I potentially redefine it? So when you think about the research that you guys are doing, what is it telling you about the success narrative at this age, at this stage of life?
Yeah. Well, one of the things we did when our first generation was nearing the end of their lives, when they were in their early 80s, we asked them, looking back on your life, what are you proudest of? And also, what do you regret the most? And, many of these people were like fancy folks. They had led corporations. They had done all kinds of fancy things. But everybody to a person would write about something related to other people. I was proudest of being a good parent. I was proudest of being a good boss, of being a good mentor, of being a good spouse, right? And so everybody looked at their lives and named relationships. They didn't name achievements. They didn't name, some people had made lots of money. Nobody mentioned that. And so, again, that's looking back when you're toward the end of life. And we know that our priorities change as we go through life. But most people in our study found that it was the ways that they had connected with other people and helped other people that they were the proudest of.
I guess I'll dig a little bit deeper, though, because I find, you're running from your kids, soccer games, like you're dealing with life at work, like you're managing, trying to be a parent, you're taking care of adults. I mean, like, there's not enough time. Like, so this idea of like having your circle get smaller and smaller and smaller is actually very real at this stage of life. So how do you all begin to provide some insight, some strategies forward for us to begin to really connect with that truth, if indeed that is the kind of pathway to happiness?
Right, because you could take away from what I'm saying, this is just one more thing I'm not doing well, right?
Literally. I mean, raise your hand, like, if you agree.
How am I gonna find time for this? So we did, we studied the people who were the best at this in our study, were the people who sort of would integrate connection with people into their lives. So they would, for example, if you were going to go for a walk, you'd have somebody go with you. If you're going to walk your dog, you'd say, come walk with me. If you were going to go to the gym, you'd meet somebody there. And we know you're more likely to actually show up at the gym if somebody's waiting for you.
Yes.
And there were people who would make it a point to connect with other people. And so what I think we found was that you can integrate it into your day, into things you're already doing. So for example, if some of you take public transportation, or even if you're driving your own car, you could call somebody, or you could you could just make it a point to text somebody during the day, And it was the people who stayed in touch that had more people in their lives as they went through their lives.
That makes sense. Yeah, it's funny. I have literally had a mother battle cancer, going through a divorce, like navigating an extremely rough entrepreneurial period. And yet every morning I send a gratitude text to 3 people. And it, like, for the last year, and it has absolutely transformed my entire disposition. So yeah, that makes a difference.
That is great. This is a great example. So gratitude, I used to think gratitude practice was totally hokey. I thought this is like Bullshit. It really works. So the question is, why does it work? So we know about that from cognitive science. It turns out that the mind evolved to pay more attention to what's wrong, to pay more attention to threats than to what's right. And we know this from really good experiments. And we think it's probably for survival reasons that, you know, you're out there on the savannah, and if you're good at scanning for threats, you're more likely to pass on your genes rather than getting eaten by something, right? And so, what? Yeah. So all that
Fear is definitely needed.
all that negative, neurotic stuff, oh, it's great for that. But it's not good for keeping us happy. And so what we know, what gratitude practice actually does, it's a corrective for that negative bias that's built in. So let's say, you know, I get really annoyed with my wife about how she loads the dishwasher, right? I mean, it's just, you know, but then when I stop to think, when I do a gratitude practice and think, well, what if she weren't in my life? I mean, then suddenly all this other stuff comes up that reminds me, loading the dishwasher is nothing compared to everything else in this relationship. And so I think when you're doing gratitude practice, it's no wonder that it makes you feel better because it's correcting your negative bias.
And I love what you're saying, though, about a practice, right? Because I think it almost requires like programming ourselves to counteract our natural tendencies. And I feel like the one question I wanted to ask about that was, I watched this really funny comedian who did a skit about how we're so uncomfortable being lonely that we are never allowing ourselves to be by ourselves. Like, who's ever pulled up at a red light and like reached for their phone just to make sure that maybe someone texted? Like, I can't sit at a red light by myself for 5 seconds. But I'm really curious what your thoughts are, and I'm jumping a little bit ahead because it feels like it flows with this part. What if our habits are not supportive of us right now? Is it important to do an audit and like, you know, and the other follow-up to that is, what do you think you're gonna find in this study 20 years from now with this generation of people whose habits are filling it by pulling for technology, social media, like that sort of connection versus calling up a friend and going for a walk?
We're studying that, actually. We've asked, but we're asking baby boomers, the second generation, how are you using the digital world? How are you using social media? You know, first of all, this is not going away, right? So even if we declare a war on the digital world and social media, it's not going to disappear. But research is showing us that how we use the digital world matters enormously, and that's probably where the place is for us to intervene with ourselves and intervene with our kids and our grandkids, and right. So there's some good research out of University of Kansas, a guy named Jeff Hall, who studies how people use social media. And what he finds is that, first of all, that if you actively connect with people in the digital world, that actually gives us hits of well-being. That raises our well-being. If you passively scroll through other people's Instagram feeds, through other people's curated lives, you know, where everybody else looks like they're living their best life and I'm not, right? You know, that actually lowers well-being. It makes us more depressed, more anxious, lowers self-esteem. And this is particularly true for younger people. So the research shows that particularly for young people who are prone to anxiety or depression, social media use can make it a lot worse. And that it's really important to try to help those people kind of temper their use of social media. And all of us, I think, you know, so I didn't directly, you were asking about our study, but I think there's better research than there is in our study out there now about using the digital world.
Well, it's fascinating. So, you know, my mom's a boomer, and she has, like I said, been kind of sick this year. And it's ironic because I found that her being on social media has actually made her happier.
Yeah.
Like it's a fascinating distinction because she's like, ooh, there's this outside world, and she's a big golfer, and she's like, I see my friends golfing. So it is something that I think intention around technology usage is what I'm taking away from this. It's like, yeah, you can pick up your phone, but are you picking up your phone to actually spend 15 minutes calling somebody you haven't spoken to in a while versus like, let me just check my email? So I wonder how many people in the room are actually like thinking about intentionality around digital usage and intentionality around how you're leveraging technology, chat, all the new stuff that is coming through. Yeah.
I want to quote one of my Zen teachers now because it's relevant here. He said, John Tarrant is his name, and he said, attention is the most basic form of love. And what he meant by that was giving somebody our full attention is probably the most valuable thing we've got to give. It's also really hard to give when we have these screens. I mean, you know, people have 2 and 3 screens open at once. Many of you are on your screens right now. I understand it. I get it. I totally get it. But the thing is that to really fully be present with other people is the way out of this.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to dive in here. And just for context, you guys, we're going to agenda-wise kind of talk and ask our questions till about 40 after. Then we want to open it up for questions. So get your questions ready. We're going to make sure we have a runner. But as a coach, you know, I work with a lot of high-achieving, you know, C-suite executives, senior leaders. I am also an advocate of what I have kind of described as my arrested rebel movement. I'm a recovering high achiever who felt extremely guilty for slowing down. It's something I'm always trying to work with my clients around. And so your idea around like how do you actually create space for like intentional attention is something that I really want to ask you about because, you know, your research shows that rest is not something you have to earn. Like rest is not something that comes after the work. It's actually essential for successful work. And I just want to shout that out for anybody who keeps telling themselves, I don't have time to rest. That is a lie. Yeah. And I'm on a mission to change that. So why do we still equate rest with weakness, though? Like, why do people still feel guilty for slowing down?
Well, a lot of people are asking that now, particularly with all the awfulness going on in the world. People are saying, how can I, you know, rest? How can I take care of myself? And there's actually an Indian guru who said, you cannot pour water from an empty cup. That you gotta keep refueling, right? But you know, I got programmed from the time I was tiny to just achieve, right? I mean, that's how I got to Harvard, I'm embarrassed to say. And I've spent my whole life at Harvard.
Yeah.
And so it's taken me a lot of kind of reorientation. My Zen practice really helped with that, so I could sort of see what I was doing. But I think that this idea of slowing down, part of it is that it gets scary. Who am I if I'm not a person who's achieving something this week?
Pause.
Right?
Who has asked themselves that question when they've ever been told to be still?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
so it's not just you. Like,
right. And one of the things that does happen, and it's starting to happen to you, is that there's good research that shows that as we get into our mid to late 40s and then into our 50s, we start to get the sense that, oh my God, this death thing is real. It's not just something that happens to somebody else. I'm not going to be the only exception in history.
Yes.
And that process, it's called, in psychology, it's called mortality salience. And what happens, we know it in our bones. Like we all have known this since we were little. But when you know it in your bones, you subliminally start to make changes away from grabbing for badges of achievement and more toward stopping and paying attention to what makes you happy and the people who make you happy and literally stopping and smelling the roses. So, and ironically, I thought it would make us sadder. You know, we're more aware of our own mortality as we get older. It makes us happier. As a species, human beings, mood gets happier as we get older.
Well, and how many times, I mean, you know, it's funny, like Will Smith has this really great video that goes around IG right now where he talks about like the idea that his father was going to die kind of came up, and they said that his dad had like maybe 2 weeks to live. It ended up having like another year or so. Don't quote me exactly on the numbers, but he said, and because of that, every single day they lived as though he was going to die. And it absolutely transformed because it's true. Like every single day we could die. And so this idea of recognizing that tomorrow isn't promised, like at the end of the day, you could walk out of here and who knows what could happen, God forbid, does give you a greater sense of agency and being like, I am absolutely committed to making sure that I milk as much happiness out of every moment.
Yeah. And that a lot of the things that I want to achieve, then when I put them next to the fact that I'm not going to be here 50 years from now, they begin to seem not so important. In fact, my department chairman at the psychiatry department at Mass General was telling me I needed to put myself up for this award and I had to jump through these hoops in order to do it. And I looked at him and said, why would I want to do that? This stuff is all made up anyway, you know. And he said to me, Bob, too much Zen.
I don't know if I'm a fan of him.
But I think a lot of us are starting to experience what you're talking about. You know, I learned recently through how many people have started to have more aches and pains and physical challenges in their bodies, right? Like, oftentimes I feel like it's our bodies have to scream at us before we start listening to the inner voice that had always been telling us, maybe this isn't the path I wanted. Maybe this is, I learned recently after being in a migraine storm that migraines can be caused by adrenaline. And it took the neurologist saying, do less. And me being like, well, maybe that's really what I need to do to slow down, because apparently adrenaline fuels all of these storms. And so what are some of the questions we need to ask to find that new calibration? Right? Like I'm not taking my foot off the gas too much, because I think a lot of us have this innate drive to do something.
Yeah.
What are the things, like, how do you find that balance? Is that like, how do we touch our inner compass, I guess, to listen to that more freely?
Somebody, I think it might have been my predecessor directing the study, George Valiant, quoted someone that I really liked. He said, what do you want to live in the world after you're gone? And when I ask myself that question, I begin to worry less about stupid stuff, like whether I got this recognition or not. And I begin to think, okay, what do I want to be here when I'm not here anymore? And that's been a bit of a guiding, a beacon for me.
You know, it's fascinating because I do a lot of work with my clients around like capacity management and like, how do you make sure that you actually have the space to be more curious, to ask questions, to communicate with confidence. And one of the things that I found really helps people begin to just give themselves more permission to pause is thinking about like rest as an act of trust. And so whenever I find myself not being comfortable resting, I say, well, Kibi, what are you not trusting right now? And if I can begin to pinpoint that, then I can problem solve around that. So if it's like, I'm not trusting that, I'm going to be able to meet payroll, then it's like, okay, well, am I looking at my pipeline? Like, am I making enough calls? Like, it at least gives me something to do. So that's another thing to kind of throw out as a potential tool as you begin to kind of redefine your relationship to rest in the context of being a high achiever.
To stick to that, and I love, you're full of fabulous quotes and activities that I want to implement in my life. When we were talking about our bodies starting to fall apart, in your study, when you talk about, did I say that?
Third time? Yeah.
That was what I was thinking on my inside voice. What does the study show about, you mentioned earlier that you're supposed to sleep and exercise and eat well. Like, we all know. Like, we know you're not supposed to reach for the pint of ice cream or the bottle of wine. But, like, do we always do that? Maybe not. But what does it show about the inevitability of bodily decline, right? Like, if we're lucky, we will all live long enough to become incapacitated in some sense, to be a little bit more disabled. But, like, does that impact our well-being? Is there a mindset that goes into aging gracefully?
Yeah, there is, actually. That, one of the things we found was that the people who really railed against aging, the people who were doing, extreme skiing in their 70s, were the people who didn't do so well, because they would break the bones and have a much harder time recovering. And the people who really accepted, okay, I can't do that anymore, but I can do these things, that there is when we talk about graceful aging, a lot of it really is about thinking about, well, who am I now, including what's my body capable of now, and not railing against that so much as going with that flow. And we found that the people who did that and who were more accepting of getting older were happier, and also they didn't break as many bones.
Yeah. It's almost like what can I do, as opposed to focusing on what you can't do anymore. And how do I do that more wiser, more strategically, with less energy, because I'm just smarter and all around more experienced. I love that. Well, I do want to ask, as somebody who is also like walking around with aches and pains and inflammation and stuff, where does the idea of actually dealing with tragedy and hardships and struggle fit into the arc of a good life?
Well, I mean, we know suffering is absolutely real, and a lot of it is unavoidable, right? Buddhism is often thought to teach that we can end suffering, and that's just not true. And that's not what Buddhism teaches either. But really that what we want to do is not layer on additional optional suffering when we can. But some suffering is, there's real pain, there's real disability in our lives. There's loss that's really hard. And so I think what we find is that we manage those things better when we can do it with other people. When we, think about the hardest things you've been through in your life, when you can have other people around to help with them, it does go better. And so I think that's one of the reasons why staying engaged with other people as we age is a factor that predicts better health as well as happiness. So I think suffering happens, but that we can help to minimize it and mitigate it with our connections with other people.
Well, that's fast. I mean, how much do you kind of tie into this idea that hardship can actually make us happier?
Well, this is from research that what we know, especially when you think about kids, that if kids face challenges, or if any of us faces a challenge and we have resources to help us with it, it's not traumatic. But if we face challenges that we can't possibly deal with, that's where trauma happens. And so the hope is that most of the time we face challenges, even including severe illness, where we have resources, where people help us face it, right?
It's fascinating. I think I forget, it was somebody brilliant in this room that I was talking to, and they were saying how young people who actually experience unconditional love are absolutely capable and oftentimes benefit exponentially more when they face hardship in terms of being able to have success and happiness.
Yes.
And allowing kids being mindful as a parent that you are giving unconditional love is essential, and allowing your kids to suffer is actually a good thing.
Yeah.
That's hard for a lot of parents. I know I struggle with that, but it is something that we have to really, I think, sit with in this era where it's like we don't want to see our kids deal with anything hard.
Right. Helicoptering does not work, right? That we really need our kids to be able to develop those muscles, but you don't want, you don't let your toddler run out into the street, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
So we let people face challenges that they're capable of facing, and that's a constant judgment call.
I remember talking to Dr. Amit Sood, who's a resilience expert over at Mayo, and he offered, to your point about offering unconditional love, because sometimes, I'm not going to lie, having teenagers who sass you, it's really hard sometimes to control your...
Oh, absolutely.
But he offered this thing, what he calls the 2-minute rule. And when someone enters your life, whether it's the room, whether it's you greet them, don't improve them for the first 2 minutes. Don't be like, hey, did you do the laundry yet? Did you empty the dishwasher that you loaded incorrectly? Don't improve the people you meet for the first 2 minutes. Just let them bask in your love and that you see them and that they belong. And then you can get to other stuff. And I thought that was a really helpful framework. Good one. It ultimately comes down to so much of what you're talking about still is the people in your life, the relationships that you have. And I remember hearing, for any of you who were at the Midlife panel, Giulio Gambino this morning talked about going through a hard period, and a whole bunch of his blockmates recorded an audiobook, and I won't get into the details of that. But what struck me was there are different types of connections to have. He, in this case, was talking about this whole community of people, and you have a group, right? You can have, if you live in the same city, dinner parties with these same people once a month, and you can have these groups that you belong to. And sometimes, especially as we're coming out of the pandemic, maybe some of us are rebuilding one-on-one friendships, but we don't have that group identity. Is there a difference or a priority in any of that?
Well, people often ask, well, how many friends is the right amount? And there's no right amount. And it's having a group or having individuals. It's a highly individual thing. We're all temperamentally on a spectrum from introversion to extroversion. And there's nothing healthier about being an extrovert. Nothing at all. The culture prioritizes party animals and extroverts, but Introverts are absolutely as healthy and as creative and vibrant. So each of us has to kind of check in with ourselves. Sort of what works in terms of the settings and the right number of people. Some people just need one or two relationships in their lives. Some people really get their energy from having a lot of people around. And so it's a highly individual determination that we need to do.
Where does spirituality play into all of this? Oh. And I'm talking to you from the Zen priest angle, but also like the study side, because when you mentioned, you know, a community of people who might get your back, I think about many people's spiritual communities, whether it's synagogue, church, mosque, whatever it is, that's an identity, that's a place, it's a community. Yeah. But that also could be something very private and someone's just own sense of spirituality. Where does that play into all of this? Yeah.
Well, in our study, so again, one study doesn't show anything by itself, especially in my kind of research. So we asked people, do you have a spiritual practice? Do you go to church or synagogue or mosque or, you know, and about half of the people said yes. About half the people said no. And neither group was happier. But many of the people who had spiritual or religious practices said that it really helped them through hard times. Now, my colleague Tyler Vanderweel, who does the Human Flourishing Project at Harvard, Tyler finds that in fact spiritual affiliation and practice does make people happier. Tyler's a deeply religious person. So one of the issues is, do we find what we're looking for? And I ask this all the time, you know, in terms of my own research. But Tyler's a good researcher. So I think what we find is that the spiritual and religious practices are not tickets to happiness, but they certainly for some people are hugely impactful. And, you know, and as you're saying, some of that is community. So if you go to an organized religious institution, that's usually all about community. And it's very hard to disentangle that from the more existential spiritual solace that we get from those practices. So, because often they go together. So all that said, I think it really just depends on what calls to people. I never dreamed I would get involved in Zen. It was like a complete surprise for me about 20 years ago. I was a dyed-in-the-wool atheist. And so who knows?
What was the transformation moment for you?
Well, I'd always been interested in these big questions, so I was raised Jewish, but the kind of Old Testament, you know, guy in the white beard sitting up on a throne didn't do it for me. And I kept wondering, what do people believe this stuff? But then when someone gave me a book about Buddhist philosophy, and I thought, oh, this I might be able to embrace. And so I found a teacher and I found a group to sit with regularly, and that kind of set me on a path. But, you know, for many people, I think if I had encountered my own tradition of Judaism at a different time in my life and as a grown-up, I might well have found what I was looking for there. Yeah. But I was a spiritual seeker and didn't realize it until I kind of stumbled into it.
Go ahead.
I have one more question, but I think we're going to be ready to open it up to Q&A. So if anybody has that, we'll have some mic runners in a moment. I was speaking with a classmate earlier this weekend about this sense of purpose and this notion of like, you know, we have to have a purpose in life, and how pissed off that made them. They were like, what is this sense of, like, what is the right purpose?
Where does it fit in this idea of happiness?
Yeah, and is purpose dictated by your corporation? What is the purpose? And so how does that fit into what we're talking about? Because it seems more about people than purpose to me.
Well, and often those are intertwined, right? So I think one of the things that we find, particularly when the people who study retirement, is people are often asking the question, do I matter? And as we get older, we ask the question, do I still matter somewhere in the world? And I think that sometimes what we call purpose is really just kind of what gets me up in the morning. Yeah. And it could be anything. It could be planting tomatoes in your garden. It doesn't have to be anything grand. And it doesn't have to be something you sit down and puzzle out for hours and hours at all. What they do find in good empirical research is that people who have a sense of why, a sense of what gets me up in the morning, those people are happier, and they actually do tend to stay healthier longer, because it does provide a source of energy and a direction.
Yeah, it's like the ikigai in Japanese.
Japanese.
Yeah,
There we go. Yep.
a friend of mine used to say this all the time. She's like, Kibi, life is what happens in between trips to the drugstore.
Yeah.
Literally. So like, what are the things that you're doing in between the mundane that might seem insignificant to others, but for you, it just gives you that sense of like, yeah, I like planted a tomato and I was able to give it to my neighbor, right? Like I was able to go and take my daughter to see the stars and it lit up her eyes. And that's the stuff that we have to make sure that we're being mindful of, especially in this season of our lives. So thank you. Oh, so great. All right, we want to open it up for questions. So please, yes, we've got someone at the top. I know we have a couple of runners in the back. So when you get the mic, our ask is you please be mindful that there are a lot of questions. So ask a question and be as direct and concise as possible. All right, go ahead.
So you can have connections with people that are good connections. But what about when you have like really difficult people in your life that you can't disengage from?
Yeah. Oh, that,
Yes.
I'm really glad you asked that because, you could come away from this thinking, oh, my relationships have to be kumbaya all the time or I'm screwed. And no, most relationships of any consequence have conflict. Some relationships are really full of conflict. They're acrimonious. The best research on this has been done in relation to couples and divorce. And what they find is that couples where there's huge acrimony and constant fighting, those couples, health-wise as well as mood-wise, are usually better off splitting up. And so stepping away from relationships is something, sometimes we have to do, and particularly if we can, violent relationships. One of the things, I'm a psychotherapist. My wife specializes in couples therapy. She's a psychologist. There's a lot that can be done with couples work. And it's not just married couples. It can be like my wife has siblings come to her who've had a terrible falling out. And you can really get to a better place. You've probably as coaches.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
You can get to a better place. So what I would say is you're absolutely right that some relationships just cannot be mended and they need to be stepped away from. But it is really worth a try. If there's a lot invested, it's really worth trying to make it better.
Yeah. And just as somebody who coaches people on how to navigate like tough conversations, difficult relationships, I will say two things. There is joy on the other side of the pain. And a lot of us kind of will choose to retreat instead of saying what actually is our truth. And so if you need help, like figuring out how to say it in a way that's not going to be cruel, get support. And I think this idea of like, we can create happiness in community. I think a lot of us struggle because we just don't want to ask for help. And so if we can be honest about, hey, I want this, but I need help on how to do this, it really helps you get to the other side. So just say that.
I'm very loud. So I was speaking yesterday to the administrator at Lowell House, and she mentioned that she had seen that more kids now have blocking groups of 2, maybe 3, and more people are not blocking with anybody at all. Whereas when we were there were, blocking groups of 16. So first question, do you think this is indicative of fewer real relationships that we have found lead to happiness in that generation? And for those of us who have kids around that age, what can we do to help support them going forward?
Oh, that is such a good question. I got interviewed by some Crimson reporters a couple of weeks ago, who called me and said, "Do you think the dating scene has changed?" Now, it doesn't directly answer you about blocking, but it is about socializing. And basically they ended up educating me. That basically they said that when they asked Harvard undergrads now, "Are you dating anyone?" About 5% thought that people estimated that about 5% of their peers were dating somebody. And I remember when I was an undergrad, we really wanted to partner up. We really wanted to be with somebody, many of us, a great many of us. It was kind of the ideal. And I think those ideals have changed. I don't know why. It doesn't get to your question about like roommate groups. But I think it's related somehow in that I think people, there's another thing that may be relevant here, which some of the undergraduate, like house staff talk about, which is that when kids come to college now, when we came to college, and I bet when you guys came to college, like there wasn't texting. There weren't cell phones when I came to college, right? So you couldn't call your high school friends, right? You didn't. And long distance was a big deal. And so you made new friends. And what they're finding now is that many kids come to college and they're just on their phones. And they're texting with their friend groups from home, and they don't really engage in the same way socially in life on campus. Now, those obviously there are trends and there are exceptions, but I think it may speak to some of what you're talking about, which is that digital media often keep kids tied to where they've come from rather than fully engaging in life here.
Yeah.
Can I add to that? You know, because I appreciate that you notice that there's this shifting trend, but to your point earlier in your question, you had said so many of us feel guilty about slowing down, about taking time, about prioritizing friends. I can't tell you how many girlfriends are just like, I can't because I got to drive my kid and I got to go do this and I got to go do work. Like, I don't have time for my friends. And I wonder what we're modeling as parents. And one exercise I read from a book called Take Time for Your Life by Cheryl Richardson had us list out 6 categories. And I've been doing this once a year for the last decade. And it was, if I'm remembering correctly, the family members, children in your life, people in your career, your spiritual community, your good friends who you will pour your soul out to, and your acquaintances. And the trick is you brain dump everybody that you can think of, but they can only show up on one list. Where do they best fit? And I tell you, the first time I did this, I had 0 people in my spiritual community. And I'm like, oh, interesting blind spot. But then to your point about, toxic relationships, the idea is like, if people give you the ick when you see their name on them, you cross them out. Or if people are like in your acquaintance list and you're like, they'd make a great addition to my spiritual community, you circle and you move it. But like, how often do we audit our communities? How often are we modeling for our children what it means to have dinner parties and taking time for our friends, and that it's okay to have different, I don't want to say types of friends, but there are going to be friends who you are acquaintances with, who are the school drop-off parents, who are like the pour your heart out friends. And for kids to understand that from our modeling is also potentially very helpful, is what I've learned. So.
Absolutely. And there's research on this about how actually casual relationships are really beneficial to us, that they are not trivial. And the other thing is, one of my colleagues, a guy named Eli Finkel at Northwestern, wrote a book called The All or Nothing Marriage, where he talks about the kind of Western ideal that we think we're supposed to get everything we need from one person. And he said that is just a terrible ideal. It's a lie. And that very few couples do that. And that in fact, but we can end up feeling like there's something wrong if we get a lot of what we need from different kinds of relationships, of the kinds you're describing. And so I think it's worth just naming that cultural myth for what it is.
Yeah, I see that a lot at work too. I have a lot of young people who come to me and say, well, my job is not giving me. And this idea that our job was meant to give us everything, like love, joy, it's like you have parents for that. You have a church for that. You have friends for that. Like, so even in the professional sense, this idea that our work is supposed to be everything is what a lot of young people are having to learn and kind of be taught to break that up. Yeah, so makes sense. Yep, you're good.
It's working. Hi, thank you very much for this. I think, I guess my question also goes back to the contemporary Harvard and the contemporary life. I think, thank you for sharing all these wisdoms with us. And I think in some ways, maybe you're actually talking to the converted among many of us here, right? Because in the 25 years, we've kind of traveled those paths and maybe made these realizations and have sought out these different journeys. But I'm wondering, to what extent, I think one of the reasons why Harvard is so challenging for most of us, right, is precisely because these aren't the values that are taught. These aren't kind of the things that you're told. Like in the environment, it's, succeed, 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 work hard, work hard. So I'm wondering, in today's Harvard undergraduate environment, are they taught, or I know that Harvard will always.
What are young people?
Yeah, what are they like? Are you introducing these ideas? Because I think if a lot of people in their 40s are seeking your assistance, as executive coach, it's because they haven't been told that.
Oh, absolutely, that's why.
Acceptable, right? It's acceptable to take a break.
And I think
anyway,
it says something.
to make it short, like one is, Is Harvard aware of this? Are we aware that, we have this crisis 20 years
Yeah, what are you guys doing to kind of combat that today?
Well, it's not me, but
Well, I know, yes. We don't want to catch it. He's like, I'm the converted. Like
there was an undergraduate well-being week not that long ago at Harvard. I think the provost's office is worried about this, and many. My friend Lori Santos is a psychologist at Yale, and Lori was master's not the right word now, but she was head of a college at Yale, and she found that her undergraduates were so desperately stressed and unhappy. So that's why she offered a happiness course. She thought she'd get 30 people to sign up, and 1,200 people signed up. And Yale did not want to turn anybody away, so they were holding it in this gigantic auditorium. But I think what you're pointing to is that I think many people now are realizing that undergraduate well-being is the big elephant in the room that's not being attended to. Mm-hmm. Not just not just people who go to college either, but
even younger.
But even younger, and that we need to do much more of that. I have some colleagues who work on this thing called social and emotional learning. You've probably all heard of it, but somebody's clapping because it's really important.
Real.
It's a set of it's social skills training for kids.
Yes.
For anybody, but starting with really young kids and all the way through high school and even into college, where with young kids, it's like, well, this is what feelings are. This is what it's like to have an argument with your friend. And what can you do?
Yes.
This is what bullying looks like. And when they offer these programs to children in classrooms, they do hugely better, not just in terms of being happier and having more friends and not getting into trouble. They do better in their academic subjects.
Resilience.
And so what we're really learning is that we need to do this much younger than we're doing it now. The pushback often comes from families who are afraid that their kids will be taught values that are not compatible with the values in the family. But that's not usually. These are more value neutral. Well, I don't know. I'm not sure.
No, I would argue they're value neutral because I'm consistently blown away where I will talk to somebody who's the CEO of a Fortune 100 company managing like 20, 30, 40,000 people. And when I ask them how something someone did to them made them feel, they look at me crazy. Yes. And I have to pull out an emotion wheel and say, okay, I want you to choose. You guys laugh.
You've all worked with people like this.
And so, and so I always say, well, how often do you talk about this with your kids? And how often and they are like, I don't know. So I think it is important for all of us as, parents of young people to really be mindful that they're not teaching this. Like, everything you learned in kindergarten, they don't teach this stuff anymore. Like, they're not teaching you guys how to have, emotionally rich conversations without being called, you're a crybaby, you're weak, you're all that kind of stuff. So there is an onus, I think, on parents here to be mindful of what are you doing? What are you modeling? How much are you actually creating space for people to actually just have conversations about things that are very human?
Absolutely. I mean, I think the kids are being taught it in a lot of schools, depending on what state you live in. But I think it's an important skill. And I don't mean to plug Yale, but I did tell Lori that I was going to tell people, she does have an online course. Yeah. So the Yale course for happiness is out there. She actually launched a teen version. So if you have teenagers who want to learn this, they can do that online. And she just launched a parenting course as well, if you want to be able to do this with your kids and understand the science yourself on how to share this with your children. So these resources are out there, but I think there's a reason why back in 2008, Harvard's positive psychology class was one of the most popular classes, right? The students continue to say that it's a formative experience, and the more we can talk about this in our lives, model it with integrity, and show our kids also, I think we can slowly, incrementally change the tone and the health of and happiness of our future.
Hi, thank you very much. I was just curious, you're talking about how undergrads today maybe, texting with their high school friends instead of making new friends. And so I was curious, given that so much of relationships happen over text or Zoom today, does that make a difference? Does it matter kind of the medium in which people are connecting?
Wow, that's such a good question. There's research going on about this. I think, we know that in person, that emotion is contagious. You all know this, right? Like you walk into a room where people have been arguing and you can pick it up like that, right? You walk into a room where people are happy and it suffuses things. So we know that things get filtered out, not just through text, but even through Zoom, video platforms. We're just not sure exactly what gets filtered out and how essential that is to human interaction. I think we're going to know more in the coming years because we've had to learn about this, because there are these different forms of communication. But I think everybody, remember when you had been in lockdown through the pandemic and then you began to be with people again? There was this outpouring of joy, right? And so we know that there's something about being together that really is unique, that's different. And we're just having to learn more about exactly what that is and how much of it we need.
80 to 90% of communication is nonverbal. So I think even that alone kind of helps you see how much connection and trust is built by not what you say. So think about what's lost when it comes to nonverbal communication and text. Think about what you don't get to see from the little screen, on Zoom and stuff like that. So to your point, I don't think the data is definitive, but it's absolutely.
When there's something to be said about seeing and touching people as well. I think there's a reason we need hugs, we handshake. There is a very human element for our well-being, and we know there's an impact to human development if people are not touched. So we do need to emerge in the real world if we want to optimize our health, I think.
Thank you, everyone,
Awesome.
for being here.
Thank you guys so much. Thank you, Dr. Waldinger. It is a gift.
Thank you so much.